Hi everyone, welcome to this video, which is about sex-linked traits. So today we're going to be talking about traits where the gene for that trait is located on a sex chromosome. And maybe you recall from our karyotype activity that the two sex chromosomes are the X chromosome and the Y chromosome. So if a gene is located on either one of these, the way it's inherited is going to be a little bit different than any of the kinds of inheritance that we've talked about so far. So, to start out, let's just remind ourselves the difference between somebody who is chromosomally female and chromosomally male in terms of the kinds of sex chromosomes that they have. So, this is true at least in mammals, where somebody who's chromosomally female is going to have two copies of the X chromosome. So, they'll have inherited one copy of the X from the egg. And remember, the egg is always going to give an X chromosome and another X chromosome from the sperm. However, the sperm doesn't always have to give an X chromosome. As you can see in the case of somebody who's chromosomally male, they'll have inherited an X chromosome from the egg, but gotten a Y chromosome from the sperm. So somebody who's chromosomally male will be XY, and the Y chromosome will have come from the sperm. Okay, so let's look at these X and Y chromosomes and think about how they'll work with respect to sex linked traits. So the sex chromosomes are going to be a little bit different than the non-sex chromosomes, and the name for those kinds of non-sex chromosomes are autosomes. So that would be like chromosome pair number one or chromosome number two, all of those other 22 sets of chromosomes that we saw on a karyotype. So we're seeing two X's here and an X and Y here, and so it should hopefully be immediately apparent that the X chromosome is much larger than the Y chromosome. So the X chromosome is going to have a lot more genes on it than the Y chromosome, which makes sense since people that are chromosomally female don't have a Y chromosome. So it doesn't make sense for there to be any like genes that are necessary for survival, or there can't be any really, really important genes on the Y chromosome since half the population doesn't have a Y chromosome. So the X is going to be much larger. It's going to have a lot more genes on it. And another point that I want to make is that these two X chromosomes here from this person who's chromosomally female, these are homologous. It's a homologous pair. So maybe this X chromosome came from the genetic mother, and this X chromosome came from the genetic father, and they'll be homologous. So same banding pattern, same centromere position, but maybe different alleles. However, this set of sex chromosomes here, this X and this Y, are not actually homologous, and that's because they're not the same size. They don't have the same banding pattern, and the genes are not going to be similar between them. So X and Y are not homologous pairs. And when we're thinking about a sex-linked trait, what we're going to be talking about is a trait where the gene for that trait is located on a sex chromosome. Most often, we're going to be thinking about X linked traits or X linked genes. And again, that's just because the X chromosome just has so many more genes on it than the Y chromosome. So it's more likely that we'll be thinking of a trait that's going to be on the X chromosome compared to the Y chromosome. So an X linked gene is a gene that's only found on the X chromosome, it's not present on the Y chromosome. And when we're doing the notation for these kinds of traits, we use the X or Y chromosome themselves as sort of the base letter, and then we'll use superscripts to denote dominant or recessive. So somebody who's chromosomally female, remember, is going to have two X chromosomes. So we'll be using two X's for our main letters, and then in this case, I'm using a big A and a little a. So this person would be homozygous dominant. So two X chromosomes with a dominant gene. This person is heterozygous. So one X chromosome with the dominant allele and one X chromosome with the recessive allele. And this person is homozygous recessive. So both copies of the X chromosome carry the recessive allele. Um, However, when you're looking at somebody who's chromosomally male, they're only going to have one version of the allele. that came from the egg, because for people that are male, the sperm would have carried the Y chromosome instead. So this person isn't going to you can't use the phrasing homozygous or heterozygous because they only have one copy of that allele. So this person is just going to show whatever the dominant trait is, and this person is going to show whatever the recessive trait is, because they sort of only have one shot at whatever that trait is. So this person got the dominant form and this person got the recessive form. So, if we're thinking about what's happening to these X-linked traits as gametes are being formed, so as these cells are going through meiosis, if somebody has two copies of that X chromosome, then they'll make gametes with either one of those copies of the X. So, somebody who's chromosomally female and is making eggs is going to make eggs that either have X big A if they're passing on the dominant form of the trait, or they'll make an egg that's got the recessive form, so X little a is the other thing that they could make. The eggs could contain either versions of this X chromosome. However, if somebody is chromosomally male, then they only have one allele that could possibly make it into the sperm. And that allele doesn't even have to be what gets up and ends up in the sperm. It could also be the Y chromosome that ends up in the sperm. So for people that are chromosomally male that are making sperm, you could either pass on the one copy of the X allele that you have. So in this case, they have the dominant copy, so X big A, or they could pass on the Y chromosome. So in this case, this sperm doesn't have any copy of the X-linked gene at all. So let's look at an example problem and see how this will all work in practice. So this problem is about red green color blindness, and it says it's an X-linked recessive trait. So this is going to be a trait that's found on the X chromosome, and it works in the recessive inheritance pattern, just like what we learned about earlier with the complete dominance and complete recessiveness. So it says a woman is heterozygous for red green color blindness, and she marries a man of normal vision. What type of vision can be expected in their offspring? So from this, we know that the mother is going to be heterozygous. And remember, we're going to use X's as our base letter. And then heterozygous, so one copy of the dominant allele, or big B, one copy of the recessive allele, or little b. And the word that we use for people that are heterozygous for diseases, we call them a carrier for the disease, because they don't show it themselves. They're not showing whatever the condition is, but they carry the the recessive allele that could give rise to that condition. And then the father, it says the father has normal vision. So we know that the father is going to have one Y chromosome, and then for the X chromosome, since the person has a normal vision, it's got to be the dominant form, so X big B. From here, we're just going to do a regular Punnett square like what we've been practicing. So we'll set up the mother along one side and the father along the other. So here's the mother's genotype, two X's with a big B and a little b. And here's the father, X big B and a Y. So when we're looking at the results of this Punnett square, for sex-linked traits, we should separate what we're looking at based on the sex of the offspring. So you'll notice that the two top squares are offspring where we have two X chromosomes, and the two bottom squares are offspring where we're looking at one X chromosome and one Y chromosome. So look at the two top squares first. So we've got um, one quarter where we have a homozygous dominant, basically. So two X's, and they both have the dominant form of the allele. So X big B, X big B. Um, the other option for chromosomally female offspring are going to be heterozygous. So one X has the dominant big B, the other X has the recessive little b. So these are all of the options for if we're getting female offspring, and all of them are going to have normal vision because they all have at least one copy of the dominant normal vision allele. However, the situation is a little bit different if we look at our chromosomally male offspring. So here, the one copy of the X chromosome that this square has is normal, so X big B with a Y. So this is representing a chromosomally male person who's going to have normal vision because they've got the dominant allele. However, over here, again, we only have one copy of the X chromosome, but that one copy is a little b. So this is going to be somebody who's chromosomally male, but is going to be colorblind. So all of the XX offspring are going to have normal vision because they all have at least one copy of the dominant allele, but half of the XY offspring will have normal vision and the other half will be colorblind. So this trait is going to show a typical pattern that we tend to see with recessive X-linked traits. And that pattern is that you're going to see these traits a lot more often in male offspring compared to female offspring. And that's because, as you can see here, chromosomally female offspring that have two X chromosomes sort of have two chances to get a normal allele. But chromosomally male offspring just have one shot because they only have one X. So if that one X chromosome that they have is for the normal phenotype, then they'll be okay. But if that one X chromosome that they have is for a condition or a disease, then they don't have another chance to make up for it. So we'll do some more practice problems in class, and I will see you all then.